My beloved child, before this moment ends, you need to hear a story that remained locked away for 20 long years. A story about a man who carried a single sentence inside his heart every sunrise and every sleepless night, yet never found the courage to let those words escape. Everyone believed his silence meant peace. They believed time had erased the past. They believed forgotten promises simply disappeared. But they were wrong. Some truths do not fade. They grow heavier with every passing year until even silence begins to shake beneath their weight. Tonight, that weight can no longer be carried. Stay with this story, because every detail you hear is leading toward one moment, the moment that changes everything. What waited 20 years was never a simple confession. It was something far greater. The old wooden box had remained untouched in the highest corner of the attic since the day the family moved into the house. Dust covered every edge, yet nobody ever dared to throw it away. Whenever someone asked about it, the man would quietly change the subject and walk away. His children thought it contained old photographs. His neighbors assumed it held forgotten memories. Only he knew what rested inside. Every birthday, every holiday, every celebration reminded him of that hidden box. More than once he climbed the attic stairs, reached for the lid, and almost opened it. But every single time, fear convinced him to leave it closed for one more year. He kept telling himself tomorrow would be easier. Tomorrow never came. Then, on a calm evening unlike any other, he heard words that froze him completely. How well do we really know the people we love? Those innocent words shattered 20 years of carefully protected silence. Outside, rain slowly covered the windows while the family gathered downstairs, laughing over stories from the past. The man smiled with them, but his hands refused to stop trembling. Across the room stood someone who had spent 2 decades searching for answers without even realizing it. Every glance felt heavier than the last. Every heartbeat whispered that time had finally run out. Hidden inside the attic was a sealed envelope with a date written across its front, today's date. No one else had ever noticed it before. No one else even knew it existed. It had been waiting patiently through thousands of ordinary mornings for this exact night. The envelope contained only a few pages, yet those pages held the power to rewrite everything the family believed about their own history. Once opened, there would be no returning to the comfortable version of the past. As midnight drew closer, the man quietly disappeared from the living room without anyone noticing. His footsteps echoed softly as he climbed toward the attic one final time. He stood before the old wooden box longer than ever before. His hand rested on the lid, motionless, as memories flooded back with perfect clarity. 20 years earlier he had made a promise that seemed impossible to break. Now keeping that promise meant losing something even more precious than his secret. With a deep breath, he slowly lifted the lid. The envelope was still there, untouched, waiting exactly where he had left it. But beneath the envelope was something no one had expected. Something that should never have existed. The moment he saw it, even he whispered, "How is this possible?" And in that instant, the truth became far more unbelievable than the confession he had spent 20 years preparing to make. The object beneath the envelope was not another letter, nor an old photograph, nor a forgotten keepsake. It was a small brass key wrapped in a faded piece of cloth that carried the same date written on the envelope. The man's face turned pale the moment he touched it. For 20 years he had convinced himself that the key no longer mattered, that its purpose had disappeared with time. Yet here it was, untouched, waiting beside the truth he had tried so hard to protect. He carefully unfolded the cloth and found a single sentence written in familiar handwriting: "If this key is ever found, the truth is already too late." Those words echoed through the silent attic like a voice returning from another lifetime. Stay till the end, because what this key unlocked would force every memory to be questioned. Downstairs, laughter slowly faded as the family realized he had been gone longer than expected. One by one, conversations stopped. The youngest member of the family glanced toward the staircase and quietly wondered what could keep someone in an attic for so long. At that exact moment, the man opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were several neatly folded pages and one worn map marked with a tiny circle on the edge of a nearby town. There was no explanation, only a simple instruction: go there before anyone reads the final page. His heartbeat raced. He had completely forgotten about the map. 20 years earlier he believed he would never need it again. Now it had returned at the exact moment the truth demanded to be heard. Every decision from this point forward would change someone forever. Without saying a word, he slipped the pages back into the envelope and quietly placed the brass key into his pocket. As he reached the attic door, he noticed something that made him stop instantly. Fresh footprints crossed the dusty floor behind him. They had not been there when he entered. Someone else had already come into the attic, someone who had seen the open box. He looked around, but the room stood completely silent. The window remained closed. The door had never creaked. Yet the footprints ended abruptly beside the empty corner where nothing appeared to be missing. His pulse quickened as one impossible thought entered his mind. Had someone already discovered the secret before he was finally ready to reveal it? The answer terrified him more than the confession itself. He rushed downstairs, trying to hide the fear on his face, but everything had changed. The family was no longer gathered around the table. Every chair stood empty except one. Resting in the center of the table was a folded note that had not been there only moments before. No name. No signature. Just a single sentence written in calm, careful handwriting: "You waited 20 years, but someone else stopped waiting tonight." The room fell completely silent. The envelope suddenly felt heavier than ever before, and for the first time in 2 decades, the man realized the truth was no longer his alone. Someone else already knew. And they were about to reveal something he had never expected. Morning arrived, but the house no longer felt like home. The silence carried a different weight now, as if every wall had overheard a conversation that had never actually taken place. The man stood alone, reading the mysterious note again and again, hoping the words would somehow reveal a hidden meaning. They never did. The envelope remained unopened beyond the first few pages, the brass key rested firmly in his pocket, and the map seemed to pull him toward a destination he had spent 20 years trying to forget. Yet one question refused to leave his mind. Who had entered the attic? Who had known exactly where the box was hidden? Stay with this story, because the next discovery would prove that someone had been waiting for this moment just as patiently as he had. He quietly followed the faded map until it led him to the edge of an abandoned railway station that had long disappeared from every modern map. Nature had slowly reclaimed the tracks, and broken benches stood beneath trees that had grown undisturbed for decades. Nothing seemed unusual until he noticed an old metal locker built into a cracked brick wall. Its lock was covered in rust, but the shape matched the brass key perfectly. His hands hesitated for only a second before sliding the key inside. The lock opened with a soft click, almost as if it had been expecting him all these years. Inside rested a worn leather journal, a faded photograph, and a sealed envelope addressed not to him, but to someone whose name he had not spoken aloud in 20 years. The moment he saw that name, every memory he had buried returned with startling clarity. The photograph showed 4 smiling faces standing together beneath a bright summer sky. Yet something about it felt wrong. He counted the people once, then counted again. Every family album at home contained only 3 people from that day. This photograph clearly showed 4. One person had somehow vanished from every other copy over the years. Someone had carefully erased them from the family's history without leaving a trace. His breathing grew heavier as he opened the journal. The very first page contained a sentence written in unmistakable handwriting: "If you are reading this, then the promise we made has finally reached its end." Every page that followed revealed fragments of conversations, unfinished plans, and sacrifices that no one had ever spoken about. The truth was becoming larger than a single confession. It was becoming the hidden story of an entire family. Just as he reached the final written page, a gentle breeze carried the sound of slow footsteps across the empty station. He looked up. At the far end of the abandoned platform stood a lone figure, watching him without fear or surprise. The stranger did not wave. They did not speak. Instead, they slowly raised an identical brass key into the sunlight. The man's heart nearly stopped. There had only ever been one key, or so he had believed for 20 years. The stranger quietly smiled and spoke the words he never imagined hearing again. "You've protected only half of the truth. I've been protecting the other half." And in that unforgettable moment, he realized the biggest secret had never been hidden inside the box, it had been walking toward him all along. The stranger stepped forward slowly, carrying the second brass key as though it had never left their hand. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. 20 years of silence stood between them, heavier than any words either could find. Finally, the stranger looked directly into them. Each waited, trusting the other to make the impossible decision first. But while they waited, the years slipped away, and the truth became a prisoner of their fear instead of their promise. The stranger carefully removed another envelope from inside an old leather satchel. Unlike the first one, this envelope had never been opened. Its edges were worn, but the seal remained untouched. Across the front were 6 handwritten words that immediately stole the man's breath. "Open only when forgiveness becomes possible." His hands shook as he accepted it. 20 years earlier, he had believed forgiveness would arrive quickly. Instead, every passing year had made the truth feel more dangerous to reveal. He slowly broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It contained no accusations, no anger, and no blame. Instead, it carried a message written with remarkable kindness. If you are reading this, then I know you try to protect everyone. But love cannot survive forever inside silence. Let the truth breathe before it disappears with you. Those words struck deeper than any punishment ever could. Together, they returned to the old house before sunset. The family was waiting in complete silence, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. No one interrupted as the man placed both brass keys on the table beside the two envelopes. Every pair of eyes followed his trembling hands. He took one slow breath and finally began telling the story he had rehearsed in his heart for 20 long years. He spoke about the promise that had changed his life, the sacrifice no one had known about, and the reason he believed silence had been the only way to protect the people he loved most. As each sentence filled the room, confusion slowly gave way to understanding. Tears appeared, not because the truth was painful, but because everyone finally understood how deeply one person had carried the burden alone. The secret that had divided the past was no longer hidden. It had become a bridge that allowed healing to begin. Just when it seemed every mystery had finally been answered, the youngest member of the family quietly reached into the old wooden box and noticed something everyone else had overlooked. Hidden beneath a false wooden panel rested one final envelope, smaller than the others and covered in fresh, untouched dust. No date. No name. Only a single sentence written across the front in familiar handwriting: "This was never meant for me, it was always meant for you." The room fell silent once again. The man stared at the envelope with genuine surprise, because he had never seen it before. Whatever waited inside had remained hidden from everyone, including him, for 20 years. And in that moment, they all realized the greatest truth had not been the one he finally revealed, it was the one that had been waiting patiently for someone else to discover. No one moved. No one even reached for the final envelope. It rested in the center of the table as though it had been waiting for exactly this moment. The man slowly shook his head. "I never wrote that," he whispered. His voice carried genuine disbelief. If the handwriting was familiar, then someone from the past had left behind one last message without telling him. The youngest family member carefully picked up the envelope and turned it over. On the back was a tiny wax seal, perfectly preserved despite the passing years. Pressed into the wax was the same symbol engraved on both brass keys. The room grew completely silent. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last. Stay until the end, because the final message was about to reveal why 20 years of silence had never been the true mystery. The seal was gently broken, and a single folded page slipped onto the table. There were no long explanations, no dramatic confessions, only calm and carefully chosen words. If you are reading this together, then you have already done the hardest part. The truth was never hidden to protect a secret. It was hidden to protect hope until everyone was strong enough to carry it. Tears quietly filled the man's eyes. For the first time in 20 years, he realized he had misunderstood the promise from the very beginning. He believed he had been asked to bury the truth forever, but the letter revealed something entirely different. He had only been asked to wait for the right moment, a moment when truth would heal instead of divide. That moment had finally arrived. As the family continued reading, another folded sheet appeared beneath the first. It contained a hand-drawn family tree unlike any they had ever seen. Some names they recognized immediately. Others had never been spoken inside the house. Beside each name was a short note describing acts of kindness, quiet sacrifices, and moments of courage that had shaped generations without anyone ever knowing. The family suddenly understood that the greatest inheritance left behind was not money, property, or possessions. It was the example of people who had chosen love over fear, patience over anger, and hope over despair. The man looked around the room and saw something he had not seen in decades. There was no confusion left in anyone's eyes. There was understanding. There was peace. And most importantly, there was forgiveness that had arrived without being forced. Just as everyone believed the story had finally reached its ending, the youngest family member unfolded the very last corner of the letter and discovered a sentence hidden beneath the crease, one so small it could easily have been missed forever. It read, "The truth you discovered today explains the past, but tomorrow you will uncover why it had to happen." Beneath those words was a location, written in faded ink, leading to a place none of them had ever visited together. The man slowly smiled through his tears. For 20 years he had waited to tell the truth, believing that confession would be the end of the journey. Instead, he now understood it had only opened the first door. Somewhere beyond that forgotten place waited the final piece of a story that none of them were prepared to hear. At sunrise, the family set out together, carrying the letters, the journal, and the 2 brass keys that had changed everything. The address from the final note led them beyond familiar roads, through quiet fields, until they reached a small hill where an old stone building stood surrounded by towering trees. Time had left its mark on every brick, yet the place felt strangely welcoming. Above the weathered doorway was the very same symbol carved into both brass keys. The man stopped walking. 20 years ago, he had stood in this exact spot and promised himself he would never return. Yet fate had quietly brought him back, not alone this time, but with the very people he had spent 2 decades trying to protect. Every unanswered question seemed to lead to this single place, as though the entire journey had always been guiding them here. Inside, sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating shelves filled with carefully preserved boxes and handwritten records. Everything had been organized with remarkable care, as if someone had been expecting visitors long before they arrived. At the center of the room rested a wooden chest with 2 keyholes placed side by side. The family exchanged silent glances. Without speaking, the man placed his brass key into one lock while the stranger inserted the second key into the other. Together they turned them at the same moment. The chest opened slowly, revealing dozens of letters tied with soft ribbon. Every envelope carried the name of a different family member, past, present, and even the youngest among them. These were not messages of regret. They were messages of encouragement, wisdom, forgiveness, and hope, written years before many of life's greatest moments had even happened. It felt as though love itself had been carefully preserved, waiting patiently for the right generation to receive it. The man opened the final letter addressed to him. His hands no longer trembled with fear but with gratitude. The familiar handwriting greeted him one last time. You believed your greatest responsibility was protecting the truth. But your true purpose was protecting the people until they were ready to embrace it together. You have done far better than you ever believed. Tears quietly rolled down his face as he looked toward his family. No one saw a man burdened by secrets anymore. They saw someone who had carried an impossible weight out of love. One by one, they embraced him, not because the past had been perfect, but because honesty had finally replaced silence. In that peaceful moment, 20 years of waiting dissolved into a future no longer controlled by unanswered questions. As they prepared to leave, the youngest family member noticed one final inscription carved beneath the chest, so faint it almost disappeared into the wood. It read, "Every family has a story hidden beneath its ordinary days. The strongest families are not those without secrets, but those brave enough to face the truth when the right time finally comes." The man gently closed the chest, not because the story was ending, but because its purpose had finally been fulfilled. Outside, the morning light stretched across the hill, brighter than any of them remembered. For 20 years, the truth had waited behind locked doors, sealed envelopes, and silent promises. Now it walked